Hello and welcome to a special presentation of the Breeders' Cup and In the Money Media. This is our 2023 Breeders' Cup Betting Challenge pregame show, we'll call it. We're setting the stage. I know there's a lot of people out there, maybe they've heard of betting competitions. They don't know exactly what they are. The way I tend to describe them is think about the difference between a cash tournament in poker and the World Series of Poker. That's sort of the difference between cash play and horse racing and horse racing tournament play. And I have three of the most successful tournament players of the last few years. So a bunch of the three most recent Breeders' Cup Betting Challenge champions with us today. We'll introduce them and ask questions as we go around here. And we're going to start with Matt Miller. Matt, explain the basic rules of the BCBC.
Sure. So happy to be here. Thanks for having me. $10,000 buy-in, just like the World Series of Poker. $7,500 is immediately returned to the player on a betting card, or if you're not there in person, on your account or whatever. $2,500 goes off to the prize pool. I believe the prize pool pays out to 15 spots, and so those lucky 15 at the end will be splitting up your $2,500 if you're not one of them. But essentially, you paid in your $10,000, you have $7,500 back. You can debate for yourself the value of the tickets and the experience. I could make a pretty strong argument that the amount you're paying into the prize pool, you're getting a pretty good deal here with a really good time and just a good group of people to be around. But once the thing starts, and it does start with the very first race on Friday, it doesn't even have to be a Breeders' Cup race. You've got a structure that involves betting minimums, $600 a piece, 3 of them on Friday. I believe it's 7 of them, same amount on Saturday. They've defined a handful of bets that are a little bit too leveraged or out there for participants to be allowed to use, such as the pick six, but otherwise using win, play, show, exacta, trifecta, daily doubles. We're all out there firing away, trying to do our best to get the highest total in 2 days off of our $7,500 start.
That's what it's all about, trying to have that highest total at the end of the 2 days. Drew, Matt Miller mentioned about there are betting minimums. There are no betting maximums in the Breeders' Cup Betting Challenge. And last year at the Breeders' Cup, you made a very memorable wager to take down the whole thing. Tell the audience about that.
Yeah, so I had an opportunity to my target. I mean, we'll talk about targets later, but $97,000 and change on Flightline. I'm actually traveling with all the bet slips. They're going to be coming out. It's fascinating reading to look through all of the plays that didn't happen and the outs that were left. But $97,000 to get to the target of 150, give or take. I think I ended up at 149, and essentially turning a 2-5 shot into 9-2 because of all that prize money at the back end of it. So fantastic opportunity and the horse of a lifetime. And kind of wish we had one of those, and we might in the dirt sprint, which we'll talk about as well, because things get shaken up this year.
Let me get this straight. You bet $97,000 on a single horse to win.
At 2-5. And I think, Marshall, you were the one who ran the math on it, that my wager was the wager that inverted the payouts on the win in the place pool. So apologies to anyone else trying to get down on a win bet.
You definitely moved the needle, right? How long did it take to actually physically make that bet?
There was like 2 phone calls. I was sitting at a machine just hitting, because they only let you do $500 at a time. So I have about 10 of these pages. And there was this lady who had been working all day. We're at the end of the day. And she says, are you okay? And because I've been sitting there for 10 minutes at this point, just hitting repeat bet. And you know, I'm a bit emotional because it's like, how often are you putting 97 through a machine? So that poor lady, I had to assure her that worked at Keeneland I was okay and not wagering my house.
There's a lot of prestige involved with winning the Breeders' Cup Betting Challenge. Certainly one of the biggest contests anywhere in the gambling world, and I'll put that up there with poker in terms of prestige. But there's also a fair amount of money that you get when you win, as indicated by Drew's story. Does any of you, and I'll start with you on this one, Marshall, because I think you've got the answer, any particular flex you decided to make after winning your Breeders' Cup Betting Challenge?
Well, I ended up buying a house in Saratoga Springs. So I parlayed my money. It was during the pandemic. I bought a house unseen. Actually walked in that house for the first time in the spring of 2021 and was thrilled with the deal I got. It turned out to be a great investment. So I'd like to make the argument that I actually invested my Breeders' Cup Betting Challenge winnings in the Saratoga housing market, and I've earning so far a nice little return.
Of course, you're never going to sell, so it's paper profit purely, knowing you and how much you love Saratoga and horse racing, Marshall. But your point is still well taken. One thing I think is very notable about the BCBC as compared to other horse racing tournaments, but really maybe I'm going to say it to gambling endeavors in general, there's a tremendous expected value, assuming you're willing to risk your entire bankroll. Marshall Graham, professor at Rhodes College, extremely well-known horse player / academic. Do you think that's right? Do you think in terms of the value of your betting dollar that the BCBC really is something special?
Yeah. I mean, look, we on a day-to-day basis, you're facing other professional bettors, other computer players. It's really challenging to try to grind out money on a day-to-day basis, especially because a lot of the novice players are gone. So you enter a contest like the BCBC and you're competing against real people, right? There are a number of different ways to approach this contest, a number of different ways you can win. I'm sure Drew's strategy and Matt's strategy is going to be different than the way I approach it. The key is putting yourself in a position to get that added money. So, and plus these races are races that the computers don't really have a great edge on. These races have a lot of foreign imports, a lot of horses on different coasts preparing for it. There's a lot of information that's out there. So you can become an expert on these races fairly quickly. A lot of us know these horses really well. I printed out the forms so far to take a look, but we know most of these horses. So it's really a lot about thinking what your strategy might be and putting yourself in a position. And I know that maybe doing what Drew did is not at your comfort level, and that puts you at a pretty big disadvantage. But look, hitting the board, you hit the board and there's value, there's added money. Now it takes money it takes some money to get there. It's $7,500 your bankroll. Last year's 20th place finisher paid the 20th. Had a $32,000 bankroll, right? So we're talking about what is that? Nearly 4 times your bankroll. Is that what it is? Nearly 4 times your bankroll to get paid. So you have to have a good day, and you have to put yourself in a position to make bets, to lose your money. If you're going to sit there and just bet your minimums and try to turn $7,500 into $15,000, this probably is not for you, right? Because, for a lot of people, doubling your money would be a great day. That's not going to make it worthwhile to give up the $2,500 entry fee. But, if you're willing to take chances, a real opportunity is here.
And I'll say this, Marshall, it's so special, the betting at the Breeders' Cup. It's really the only day of the year where you're going to be able to look down at those papers, that racing form you had before, and you're going to see some pretty good-looking paper on horses that are 10-1, 15-1. So even though normally 4 or 5x over your bankroll would be a very ambitious goal, it's still an ambitious goal in the context of the Breeders' Cup, but it's not impossible by any means. And I think that's one of the reasons why some people, even if they're not willing to fire it all in one shot, like you guys have done in your victories, you still have an opportunity to get in the lower rungs of that prize pool, maybe win a fantastic trip out to the NHC in Vegas and get some extra cash with you as well. Matt Miller, I want to bring you back in to ask you about this idea of targets. Marshall was talking about the target number to reach the lower ends of the money. What do you think, as somebody who is sort of known for a win or go bust mentality, what kind of a multiple of that initial bankroll are you looking for year in, year out? And has it changed over time?
It has definitely changed over time. In general, whatever the tournament is, I do think you need to have some sense of what your target is. For a tournament of this nature, where there is so much money at the top, that's a pretty ambitious target. the multiple on your starting bankroll for this, at least in terms of the initial target, it's just much higher than a typical tournament. So I go into each tournament these days, essentially if you eliminate the early years of this tournament where there weren't as many players, the strategies were a little different, I'd say 125 grand is a reasonable starting target. I would urge anybody setting that as a target to remain flexible. There are years such as 2019 where Brad Anderson saw that his target was already surpassed and he had to fire at something crazy in order to surpass it. And there's years like the year I won where, frankly, there wasn't, I won by a fair margin actually, and there was a lot of space between me and second. And so you could argue my target was maybe high that year, or maybe I just got lucky with the way the horses went, whatever. But in any event, you have to have some idea of what you're looking for, even if that's not first. But if you're looking for first, 125 is about where I'd start. In general, it doesn't really pay a lot to set a big lead in a tournament like this because the crazies behind you are just going to recalibrate and take greater risk to get to where you're
at. To be a sitting duck. To be a sitting duck, essentially.
Absolutely.
How much do you look at the leaderboard as it's going, or are you more of Matt's way of mind of just having a target in mind and then checking out?
Yeah, I mean, the end of day one is fun to see who's on the leaderboard, but that's purely entertainment, not so much academic. And then day two, really, it doesn't matter. Like I started 4 hours before the classic with $3,700, and just keep parlaying it to try and hit the targets that I've set for myself. So the only time that it really matters, and I picked this up from Matt, is when you're making your final play. So you don't leave the putt short, or you don't bet yourself out of position if you don't have a strong enough opinion. And that's a whole nother story for another day.
Yeah. Well, and I'm glad you mentioned that because I know you guys are going to be doing another podcast with our mutual pal, Howard Kravitz, the HHH podcast, and you guys are going to get much deeper into this. We're staying at a very high level today, so we encourage folks to check out the HHH podcast, which I'll be promoting on my social media, Looms Boldly, as well. Marshall, something unique in this year's Breeders' Cup. Every Breeders' Cup to this point has always ended in the Breeders' Cup Classic. Because of TV windows this year, the Classic is actually going to be the third to last race, with the Turf Sprint and the Sprint as two races after it. How does that race order change your approach to the Breeders' Cup Betting Challenge, if at all?
It does and it doesn't. In part, you're given the Classic. In some years, the Classic is super competitive. This year, the Classic, I think, is very competitive. In some years, like last year, it isn't. So you're kind of dealt the cards you're dealt. I've made moves in the Classic in part because of it's been the race that kind of fits my handicapping the most, right? It's a dirt route for older horses. We see their form. It's a race I love. And, whether I bet heavily there or not is probably depends on my interests in the race, but I'm not going to wait around for the Sprint just because it's the last race, right? I think that, if I'm hoping to achieve the score of 125 and I get there or get a good number in the Classic, in the Distaff, in the Dirt Mile, and whatever it might be, I'm certainly going to play the Sprint, but I'm going to play it more defensively. If I get to my target early, right, you got to play the last race. You got to put you can't leave yourself a sitting duck. You try to move the needle at some point. But I don't think, I would work my way backwards. If you're thinking about playing this contest, I'd handicap backwards, but I'd still focus on what is your best opinion to make your best play. So I would start with a Sprint and work backwards. The last thing you want to do is, blow all your money earlier and then come back it later and say, wait a minute, this is actually my good opinion. Right. So I will work backwards from the Sprint, but I'm pretty sure that I'm going to try to make a move earlier.
Matt, you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I'll offer two bits here that may screw me in the end in terms of giving away strategy. I don't think I'm playing the Classic this year. My guess is that the tournament field behaviorally is not going to be able to help it. And they're going to continue to look at that as the emotional end of their contest. I think it's going to be overplayed. and I'd rather watch everyone essentially knock each other out or take themselves out, and I'll then see where the leaderboard's at. The caution I'm going to give with that strategy, and this is a little bit higher level than maybe you wanted to get to, but the amount of money bet on the last two races will not be as much money as is typically bet, because the last race, being the Classic, is super exciting and everyone knows all the horses. Not quite as exciting, at least from a public standpoint, to see what we're going to get. I do not think that the daily double pool, for example, is going to be able to withstand the kinds of bets that are required to pay $125,000, $130,000, $115,000. There's just not going to be as much liquidity there. And so I would say to players looking at the end, right, I do think I'm giving away something valuable here, but you're going to have to be very mindful of pool size as you're figuring out what to do.
Oh, I think that's a great point. Now, Drew, we weren't meant to talk about specific horses on the show, and we are just about out of time, but I've got to go back to you because you did make a comment about the sprint and maybe having a horse in there that you wouldn't feel too bad betting out about. To Matt's point, the double pool might not be what it typically is at the end of a Breeders' Cup, but you know that win pool is still going to be real robust. Where my brain goes, knowing your plays last year and knowing the enthusiasm you had for Elite Power, are you maybe tipping your hand that you could be going back in that direction this year?
We won't get 6-1, so my target walking into that race is going to have to be a lot higher than what I bet on Elite Power last time. And, Elite Power was not my main play. If Jackie's Warrior wins, I'm in 1,000 times better shape. It's funny when you go review some of the lost wagers and the outs that were given. Jackie's Warrior was a much more advantageous horse. I did like Elite Power better, but I wasn't ignoring the tote or the public because the public tends to be right a lot.
Well, and that's a very high level discussion we can get into about the wisdom of crowds and likelihood and the way value changes in the context of the contest. There's a lot to unpack there that we don't necessarily have a chance to get into in this rather limited discussion. But it's certainly interesting. It's certainly interesting to think about in the larger context of what the Breeders' Cup Betting Challenge has come to be. Marshall, any final thoughts from you about the BCBC and the advantages it has to people who maybe want to get involved? I know you've been a student in the past of those published plays that Drew was referring to.
No, I look, I think this is the contest that I wait the whole year for. When it ends, I can't wait for it to happen again. There's so much strategy involved. We're so familiar with these races. The pools are so liquid. It's something that I replay in my head over and over again, from past years to the present. And so we've been all thinking about these races really since Saratoga and thinking about where we're going to make these plays. And I feel like in 2020, I knew quite a few of my plays a month before the Breeders' Cup. And so it's just a real joy to play. And it's time consuming. It's one of the rare instances, I think, where, we really get a chance to sit down and do what we preach, that I spend a lot more time constructing tickets, not only for the BCBC, but for betting in the Breeders' Cup overall than I'm normally able to do and normally should do, right? Because it's a lot about ticket construction. This is really a betting challenge, right? Handicapping is part of it, but this is a betting challenge.
When horse racing is at its best, it succeeds as gambling game. It succeeds as great sport. Nowhere is that more evident than the Breeders' Cup Betting Challenge. Matt, I'll ask you this one. You can sort of represent the group on your answer. What would it mean to you to win another Breeders' Cup Betting Challenge?
Absolutely everything. It is, for those people that are running calculations on odds and trying to figure out if they're getting the right value, making a big, huge bet to win this thing, I would suggest to you that you are way undervaluing what a win means to a winner. It is just incredible validation. It's just a really cool thing to have. And so, I just like Marshall said, it's the highlight tournament of the year without question. it being the pinnacle, the only answer I can give to that question is to say, to win it again. There's honestly nothing else other than this. And so, just another one would be fantastic. We'll see. We'll give it a go.
Guys, we're out of time, but really appreciate you. We'll be looking for your names on that BCBC leaderboard.